So you've probably heard the term sex addiction, right? It's everywhere in pop culture. But it's also been the subject of some really fierce debate in the scientific community. Is it a real thing? Is it just an excuse for bad behavior? Or is it a genuine, diagnosable condition? Okay, let's dive into this and really separate the myths from the medicine. All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle that big question around sex addiction. Then we'll get into the official diagnosis and what it actually means. We'll also talk about what a healthy baseline for sexual behavior even looks like. After that, we'll geek out a bit on the brain science. And finally, we'll explore the different paths to treatment and recovery. So let's kick things off with the term everyone knows, sex addiction. For well over 40 years, this idea of uncontrollable sexual behavior has been a super hot topic. And honestly, to understand where we are today, you kind of have to understand its history. And this is the question that really started it all. The whole concept of being addicted to sex has been, embraced by some as a really serious problem, but then completely dismissed by others as just a lack of willpower. This debate, though, is what really pushed science and medicine to start looking for some concrete answers. This timeline shows a pretty fascinating journey. The whole idea didn't start in a lab. It actually gains traction in self-help groups when Sex Addicts Anonymous was founded back in '77. Then, in 1983, a book by Patrick Carnes brought it into the clinical conversation, even though it was more based on theory than hard data. But the real game changer? That came in 2018 when the World Health Organization officially recognized something called compulsive sexual behavior disorder, or CSBD. That moved the whole conversation from a debated concept to a formal diagnosis. Okay, so let's look at the official definition now. Once the WHO recognized it, we got a clear, clinical set of criteria. And this isn't about making moral judgments, not at all. It's about identifying a specific pattern of behavior that causes real, actual harm. And here it is. This is the core definition of CSBD. The two phrases that are absolutely key here are failure to control and marked distress or significant impairment. This is exactly what separates the disorder from just having a high sex drive. It's all about a loss of control that seriously and negatively impacts a person's life. So what do clinicians actually look for? Well, first, there's a loss of control, where sexual behavior pretty much takes over, pushing aside health, work, and relationships. Second, a history of trying to stop and failing. Third, the person keeps doing it even when it's clearly causing huge problems. And finally, and this one is so crucial, the behavior continues even when it's not satisfying anymore. It becomes a compulsion, not a pleasure. And you know what? This isn't some super rare condition. A huge international survey found that the global rate is around 5%. When you think about the potential impact on a person's well-being, that makes CSBD a pretty serious public health issue that we really need to understand better. Okay, this is a big one. This comparison really clarifies the most common point of confusion. Having a high libido is just that, a strong interest in sex. It doesn't by itself cause problems. CSBD, on the other hand, is defined by the inability to control that interest, and that's what leads to all the distress. It often goes against a person's own values, which is exactly where those feelings of guilt and shame come from. To really understand a disorder, we have to first talk about what's healthy. For way too long, shame and just plain wrong information have clouded the conversation around human sexuality. So let's clear the air and establish a healthy baseline by looking at a very common yet often stigmatized behavior. Let's just take masturbation, for example. Far from being something harmful, health experts point to tons of benefits. It's a great way to relieve stress, sleep better, boost your mood, and safely release sexual tension. Plus, it's a key way to learn about your own body and what feels good, which is a really healthy part of sexual self-discovery. This quote from Healthline just sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? Health authorities frame self-pleasure as a natural and safe part of being human, and this just reinforces the idea that the behavior itself isn't the problem. The disorder is in that compulsive, uncontrollable nature that causes so much distress. All right, let's dive into the science. What is actually going on in the brain when a behavior becomes compulsive? And how does CSBD relate to other mental health conditions? The answers are, complex, but researchers are starting to connect the dots. Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating brain-wise. This slide breaks down a key theory that separates the wanting of something, that's the craving, from the liking of it, that's the actual pleasure. In addiction and compulsion, the dopamine-driven wanting system goes into total overdrive. It becomes pathologically strong. Meanwhile, the actual liking, or the pleasure, can totally decrease. This explains why someone might compulsively chase something they don't even enjoy anymore.
And here's the thing, CSBD rarely exists in a vacuum. The comorbidity, which is just a fancy word for when two conditions happen at the same time, is extremely high. Mood and anxiety disorders are really common companions. And as you can see, over 40% of patients with CSBD also have a substance use disorder. There's also a big overlap with things like gambling disorder and ADHD.
This diagram looks a bit complicated, but it illustrates that complexity really well. So, on the left, you've got compulsive sexual behavior, or CSB. On the right, paraphilia, or PA. That's intense arousal to atypical things. They can be separate, but they can also overlap. But the most critical part is that yellow circle in the middle, marked distress. A behavior only becomes a diagnosable disorder, like CSBD, when that distress is there. So it's the personal impact that defines the disorder, not just the behavior itself.
So, knowing all this, what can actually be done? Let's get to the final piece of the puzzle, treatment. And the goal here isn't to eliminate sexuality. Not at all. It's to manage the compulsive part and help people get back to a healthy, satisfying sexual life. So, the number one treatment for CSBD is psychotherapy, and a common approach is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It helps people spot their triggers and find new ways to cope. Sometimes medication might also be considered to help manage the urges. But the ultimate goal is holistic. It's about restoring healthy sexual function and relationships. It's really important to know that no drug is officially approved specifically for CSBD. The medications that are used are what's called off-label. SSRIs, which you might know as antidepressants, can help reduce obsessive thoughts. And then there's naltrexone, which is used for alcohol and opioid dependence, that can help dial down that powerful wanting or craving we talked about earlier. We also have to be honest that there's still a lot we just don't know. The exact cause? Still a mystery. And most of the research has been focused on a really narrow group of people. We desperately need more studies on women and on sexually diverse folks to really understand how CSBD affects them. And, of course, better training for clinicians and better ways to measure if treatment is working are huge goals for the future.
Which kind of leaves us with this final question. I mean, getting CSBD into the official diagnostic manual was a huge step forward, but the scientific conversation is far from over. As our understanding of the brain, of behavior, and of culture keeps evolving, so will our approach to this really complex and deeply human condition.